Hello, this is Wade Frazier. This is August 10th, 2026, 11:45 a.m. So this post is going to be about my friend Michael Hyson. Mike has lived quite a life. Um, not long after I did my interview at Project Camelot with Brian O'Leary back in 2009, Bill Ryan forwarded an email to me from Michael Hyson. And uh, Michael had been a colleague of Brian O'Leary's during their asteroid mining and space colony days back when in the 70s. And in fact, Michael stayed with Brian back then at a conference, and Brian remembered Michael fondly. And so, yeah. And Michael was involved with technology quite a bit. In fact, he spent about 10 hours in total weightless in the zero G plane that Boeing had, or otherwise called the Vomit Comet, etc. So he was in testing some of his technology. I think someone went on the space shuttle. So he actually spent about 10 hours in total weightless, which meant like, I don't know, it was hundreds of these sessions in the zero G plane. And so Michael and I began a correspondence. And it led to phone calls. And in fact, he soon invited me to Hawaii to swim with dolphins, where he lived on the Big Island. In fact, he lived on the Hilo side, and I took him up on it the next year. In fact, my wife and I have been going to Hawaii every few years in those days, and so I turned out to be my last trip to Hawaii in 2010. In fact, we again we up until that time we'd always just gone to Oahu, and my relatives there, and we went to the Big Island, and uh, Michael set me up with a guide, take me out swimming with what he called free dolphins. And it was a spectacular encounter, which I'm actually going to just describe that day here. I don't think I've done this quite before like this, and so that's one of the reasons I'm doing this video. And it came up with again after my James Gilliland video yesterday. This is yeah, my my journey into the strange fringes and paranormal experiences, etc. So again, we stayed on these. So the Big Island's kind of strange in ways. Again, it's got a big volcano on it, and the Kona side, the dry side, is where all the money is, and so it's got all these resorts along the water, etc. When we stayed at one of those, and then the other side, the wet side, the Hilo side, it's really impoverished. So it looks almost like a third world nation in some ways. And so this was a strange contrast on the Big Island. And so anyway, so we Michael set me up again on the Kona side, set me up with a guide on the Kona side, and I met this guide there. And we went to a beach. In fact, it was interesting in that I got to interact. I got to be part of the dolphin community there for a day. Actually, more than a day, but that day was particularly amazing. And so my guide introduced me to people who bagged their careers to swim with dolphins. I mean, I'm talking attorneys, programmers, these kind of people, and they bagged it so they could swim with dolphins. And we actually we went to a bay where there's a statue of Cook, of Captain Cook, and they're hunting. And this is 2010, so we didn't have smartphones like we do today, but they had phones, and they actually had sort of an intelligence network. And so they would hang out at these various bays where the dolphins would come in the daytime to essentially sleep. Yeah, to be safe from sharks, etc. And so when they'd come in, in the daytime to sleep, that's when the activists would, or these dolphin people would hang out with them. And usually, but they were usually pretty, the dolphins were trying to sleep, so they weren't usually too active. But these people would swim with them, and anyway, we were at that bay, and there were there was a bunch of them. There was maybe a dozen people or something who were there, kind of hanging out, waiting to see if the dolphins would show up. And so then we did that, and we went to another place. We went to, in fact, it was called Two Step, as I recall, another bay. And anyway, my guide and I sat on the beach, and my guide knew everybody. Every couple of minutes, somebody's coming by to give him a hug or something. We're sitting on the beach, and I had driven, so we've flown out from Seattle to Oahu, then took a flight from Oahu to the Big Island, and then I drove more than an hour on the Big Island to meet my guide. We're down there all the way down at this beach. And I remember sitting there thinking, in fact, I asked my guy, I said, what's the chances I'm going to see a dolphin today? And he goes, oh, pretty good. And he mentioned that yesterday, the day before, they had seen one dolphin, sort of interacted with it. So anyway, so it wasn't a sure thing, it wasn't a sure thing. Here I was, and I remember thinking I had come a long way to to do this, and I might come up empty-handed. And I remember thinking about that as I sat there, going, "Man, this might be a total bust." And so, anyway, so then we were sitting there on this beach. I'm talking again. I'm talking to my guide, and eventually, in fact, he took me out for a brief swim. So we took a brief swim, swam through the coral reefs, etc. And I guess I don't know if it was giving me the workout or whatever, but we did that, and then we came back and we sat down, on the beach there. And anyways, I started talking about my so-called Wade's World talk, which is free energy and all the all the different wild things, topics, etc. That is part of my life. And so put this on hold for just a minute. So anyway, I'm sitting on the beach talking to my guide, and again, I'm half deaf, so I tend to talk loudly, particularly when I'm excited. And so I'm talking to my guide, and again, people are coming by every couple of minutes to say hi to him, and it was like his beach. And anyway, I'm sitting there talking, I'm doing my Wade's World talk, and my guy goes, Wade, could you please be quiet? Please stop speaking so loudly, and be more quiet. He thought it was creating a scene. Well, apparently the dolphins heard, or they read my mind. And so I'm not kidding. Something literally a minute or two after he told me to be quiet, the dolphins showed up. And this is and Hawaii is very different. So I grew up in a beach town in Southern California, Ventura, and the surfers would all be, you're catching waves, but the surfers are rarely more than 50 yards offshore. In fact, when I stayed um, on the North Shore at a famous surfers place, and we stayed there, several times. The first evening when we got there, I looked out and I saw something way out a quarter mile out there. I didn't know what it was, seals or something. I realized it was surfers. And so, yeah, here in Hawaii, the surfers are catching waves a quarter mile out and more. And this is normal in Hawaii. I'd never seen that before. And anyway, those kind of distances apparently they're Hawaiian distances, let's say. And so on this bay where we're sitting, here come the dolphins, but they're a quarter mile out. So and they're jumping in the air and stuff. And anyway, in fact, I remember sitting there, I pointed at I go, hey, there, look at that. And he goes, put your hand down. I'm like, okay. And so, and what it was is that he didn't want me to tip off the crowd on the beach that there were dolphins out there, like as if they couldn't see him. But anyway, he said, okay, let's go out. Let's get out there. Let's beat the crowd out to these dolphins. So it was about a quarter mile out. So we swam out a quarter mile. And I had heard, and again, I have friends who've done this kind of stuff, and I've heard of all the, um, you know, let's say, abuse of the dolphins and stuff that's going on. And I was determined to be super respectful and really standoffish. And I actually had my hands folded like this, which actually means I my guy took movies of this, and I actually put in some still frames, and I had my hands clasped like this to make sure that no dolphin thought I was going to try to touch it or anything. And so anyway, so I was sitting there treading water. I had a snorkel gear and stuff, so I didn't have to keep my head above water all the time. And anyway, and the dolphins were and they were these are spinner dolphins. So they spin. Only these dolphins were going crazy. They were jumping in the air like crazy. In fact, one jumped over my head, and it was, and I had no frame of reference. You know, kind of like when I went to watch UFOs. I had no frame of reference to know what was going to happen or what I was going to see. It's the same thing here. So I had no frame of reference of what this encounter with the dolphins would be like, and I just determined that I wouldn't try to pet them or anything. And so, and anyway, and I was sort of hanging back. So actually, a few other people came out with us, and they were sort of towards the dolphins, and I was hanging back. So I was hanging back, but the dolphins came and they started swimming around me, and but I was still kind of hanging back from the main show where these dolphins were jumping and spinning, and and my guide, um, he looked over at me with this big smile on his face, and he said, you know, I don't know who you are, but I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never seen this before. This is extraordinary behavior by these dolphins, and, and I guess they like the idea of free energy. I mean, that's what I was talking about when they showed up, and so and they were going nuts, and again, one came about like this close, like 3 feet away from me, looking me in the eye and stuff, and so they were checking me out. And anyway, and I was sitting there with my hands clasped, watching these dolphins swim around me. And then for about 15 minutes, we kind of had the dolphins to ourselves, let's say. And then about 15 minutes later, here come the tourists. You know, again, this little flotilla of maybe 50 people start swimming up. You know, and then that was kind of the end of our encounter. And so we swam back to the shoreline, sat down, and the dolphins were still going crazy. And anyway, and the guy told me that again. He actually never. It was one of the top 10 experiences he ever did, and he'd been guiding almost daily for 20 years, and it was an extraordinary encounter. So more of my beginner's luck, you know, and so yeah, it's like I should never try it again. Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna have an experience like that again. Anyway, so I got what I came for, you know, which was to hang out with dolphins. And then um Michael again lived on the Hilo side, but actually there was when we were there, they actually had a 25th anniversary party for him for his institute. So he had an institute that he founded, which was to study cetaceans, you know, whales and dolphins. And so I went to that party and hung out, and my wife came along, and we were hanging out with people who all they did was swim with dolphins. You know, one woman, in fact, she was Japanese or something, and she had just spent the last 6 months pretty much not interacting with people and just interacting with dolphins in the wild or free dolphins. And yeah, so it was quite a dolphin community there on the Big Island. And that was something to see that, something to see this the Big Island's dolphin community. And I was invited back whenever I wanted to, etc. But I don't know if I'll do that again. That was a once in a lifetime experience. It was amazing. You know, Michael actually, again, Michael was a biologist. Went to Caltech. I mean, he was big time. That's kind of why he was, you know, Brian O'Leary's buddy. And uh, Michael actually discovered that dolphins sleep by putting one hemisphere of their brains asleep at a time. You know, so they always have to be swimming and stuff. So they can't human style sleep where you're out, you're unconscious. Dolphins can't do that. So they actually sleep by sleeping one side of their brain at a time. And Michael's the one who discovered that. And I heard that from from I think the guide, my guide, I think told me that. So Michael was, yeah, he was renowned in the dolphin communities, and Michael and I, we became friends. In fact, and he would call me about once a year, and I called him sometimes, but he called about once a year, and we talk about once a year for like over an hour. And Michael was one of the only people I've ever encountered that I could talk about Wade's World, and he got it immediately. He would come back with, oh, and this and that and the other, and so and I've I've rarely had conversations like that. So it's either me holding forth or me in a defensive posture because the people are in denial and fear, et cetera, by my topics. And so which and I avoid those conversations, so I don't really have those any longer. And although I still get people who like disown me, et cetera, because I'm too strange for them. So okay. Um but Michael, at the last time we talked, it was 2019, 2018, somewhere in there. And in fact, he was into telling me that he loved me, and it was a real, it was a good friendship. It was really, we had something there. It was really great. And then he lost his home in the 2018 volcanic eruption there on the Big Island. Yeah, it actually wiped the lava wiped out his neighborhood, and then COVID-19 hit, and I think that really took the wind out of his sails. And in fact, and he dropped out of sight. His phone didn't work, his email didn't work, and he just like disappeared. And so, I've sporadically tried to find him ever since. And I haven't. Just before I did this, I was seeing what I could find on him. And apparently he was hospitalized in 2021 he had longstanding heart issues. In 2020, he was hospitalized for them. And I actually just saw something, I'm trying to confirm it, that says he may have passed away last year. And so I'm trying to confirm that right now. And if we already had our last conversation, that'd be a sad day for me, and yeah, but Michael, again, he did his homework, and so when again he would start reading my work, and then when he found the account that I posted of Mark Cummings's adventure in free energy, when he invented that free energy prototype in the basement of Lawrence Berkeley, and then had a rude awakening of how the world really works. Uh, Michael was actually a colleague of Elizabeth Rauscher, who was a famous physicist who actually taught at Berkeley, and he actually he co-authored papers with Elizabeth, and so he asked her. So he asked Elizabeth about this report. In fact, the original forum that it was published in is gone, above top secret, which is CIA run forum, and so that's when they chased me out. But I posted it in the my Avalon thread. I posted it many years ago, and he read it and he asked Elizabeth. He was doing his due diligence, and he actually asked Elizabeth about that account because Mark actually studied under Elizabeth at Berkeley, and Elizabeth replied that it happened just like Mark said. Yeah, so she was there. She said, "Yep, and Mark, it happened just like you read. That's what happened. I was there for it." So it's like, oh my. So when he saw that, it was again how to say it. I got cred with him when he's poking and doing his diligence, and it's coming up. Yeah. Um, In fact, one day he called me and said that Elizabeth actually had invented her own free energy prototype. And he called me to ask if the coast was clear for free energy. And I said no. And that was a little charming bit of naivete there to think that all's well now and you can come forward with free energy devices. No, still not. This coast isn't clear. Um, for many reasons. It's not just the organized suppression. And Michael actually, again, I'd write about things and things would happen in the popular culture around free energy, and he actually would check into the free energy tales and do his diligence and talk to Elizabeth and et cetera. And he would be appalled by some of the behavior that he encountered. And one day he said, "Gee, where's the good guys in this thing?" And I said, "Yeah, there aren't many. Brian and Dennis, They were my, again, those are the only two people I really trust in the free energy field, and for good reason. And so it's like these big names, they're just scandalous behavior, criminal behavior that so many people in the free energy field and the fringes, they engage in that stuff. And Michael saw that, and he found out, and he was like, really disappointed to hear that. But that's just it's what it is. Yeah, I'm sorry the world's that way, but it is, and that's part of the challenge of what I do. And Michael actually himself was involved in free energy invention, so he was part of little groups of scientists and inventors who were actually pursuing free energy tech. And and then I mentioned, here's the issues you come up. Here's the issues. Greed rears its head. It goes to their heads and stuff. And he's going, yep, yep. He was checking I was checking all the boxes for him for the things he ran into when they were doing that. And it's like, yeah, it's just Michael had the standard experience and he pursued these things. And so, yeah, so that's the thing where, with Michael is when we could talk, we were singing the same song. It was really something. I would be talking about things that most people, it's way outside their experience and they have a hard time dealing with it. Michael was right on it. He was all over it. And so, and that was a rare privilege for me to interact with somebody like that. So that was great. That was great interaction with Michael. In fact, he spent a morning reading an early draft of my big essay back in 2014, my Energy and the Human Journey, and he was highly impressed with it. In fact, I think it was before I contacted Peter Ward, and it was another indicator that I was doing a competent job of it. I mean, Michael's a big time scientist, a biology background again, but physics. He was a comprehensive, let's say, and he was actually an activist trying to stop some hydro or some geothermal projects there on the Big Island where they were trying to tap into the volcano, and do geothermal energy. And Michael was telling me about how a big part of the island broke off like 10,000 years ago, and he was concerned that this kind of drilling into the volcano could actually break off part of the island. And I think it's a valid concern. So he was actually active. In fact, you can look him up on the internet. He was active in trying to forestall that. So he had energy interests. So it wasn't just a dolphin guy. And he definitely was interested in the energy issue and realized how critical it was. Again, any scientist worth his salt understands that. And Michael was also, again, he was hip enough to understand the issues that are around alternative energy, et cetera. And yeah, it was really something. In fact, one of our last conversations, Michael told me what happened. He said, a vision quest. He was in a deep meditative state. And he asked the cosmos if his mission on Earth was to help bridge cetaceans and humans. And he said the response was as if the heavens opened up, and the earth-shaking response was, yes. Like it was like as if all the whales and dolphins on Earth were in chorus saying, "Yes, Michael, this is what you're here for." And so, yeah, and that makes sense. And yeah, he was big and again, I haven't gotten into a lot of his dolphin lore, but he had spectacular encounters with dolphins, and like one of them healed. He had a broken neck, and one of them actually healed his broken neck. Again, he had it's like sand in his neck for many years, etc. And he actually, I linked to this. There was a video where he was on a TV show talking about this, and the stuff I'd hear from him, it's like, and he called non-local, but definitely cetaceans, dolphins read minds. In fact, when I was with the dolphin community with my guide, etc. Again, the dolphin community considered dolphins to be their friends. It really, yeah, that's how it was. They were one of total equality, and I was hearing stories about how telepathic they are. At events, people had witnessed dolphin being telepathic with them, and then Michael had the same thing happen where it was telepathic. And again, Michael would call it non-local, but basically a dolphin could, and humans, so their children and stuff, and dolphins would interact from many miles away. You know, it's like a kid would say the dolphins are here on the beach, and the kid would be 10 miles away from the beach, but that's when they would show up when the kid, so the kid could tell that they were showing up from 10 miles away, this kind of thing. And so, yeah, so I was hearing lots. Again, this is where you enter these sort of realities and these people and their worlds, and it's like it's mind blowing to most people. You know, it's like, well, yeah, people have a hard time dealing with this, and either they get it all in denial and fear, or they go off the deep end in the other direction too. And so this is yeah, to maintain a balanced perspective of to stay grounded and engage these realities is not easy. I've seen so many casualties, and that's why my work I try to again I try to tell people take it slow. You know, don't you know instead of going off on free energy physics, let's just understand there's this heat pump. Why it was the best heating system in the world? You know, or instead of getting all worked up about the global elite and organized suppression, just understand all the lies you were told growing up. You know, the history, the media, etc. Yeah, take slow steps because when I found people when they dive in with both feet like that into the deep end, they drown. I see it all the time. And so this is not easy subject matter to engage, but Michael could, and one of the few that I've ever met that really could engage this these subjects and maintain an even keel and be productive and really have evidence keen understanding of the issues. And it was great. It was really wonderful. And I said I've had that privilege rarely in my life when I can have those kind of conversations and not have to be, trying to dumb it down to a fifth grade thing or get challenged or they fly off the handle or all those kind of things. Michael was great, and Michael was a great man, and if he indeed has passed, and it looks like he probably did. So if he did indeed pass last year, then had my last conversation on the planet with him, at least in this lifetime, and I'm sad about that. So, but I'll find out. I'll find out if it really he did pass. He probably did. Michael was 78, I think. So he would be if he was still alive. He's 77 or 78, and he had heart problems, and so he was a little overweight. And so, anyway, so that's I wanted to do that. Sort of my eulogy to Michael, and I love the guy. I miss him, and he was a great one. And I understand why Brian really had fond memories of him. Michael was a good one. So that's all I have for today.